Hello, this is the President. Hello, this is the President of the United States. Who is this? Is it you again?
Look behind you.
This is my private line. How did you get through?
They're everywhere. All the time. We see them every day. But you have to look behind you.
There is nothing behind me. How did you get this number?
The spaceman told me.
What spaceman?
It doesn't matter. They're telling you about monsters. Please, you must look behind you.
Young lady, there are no monsters in the Oval Office.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." Give up. Give up. Give up. Give up. Give up. Wait, Jimmy. Wait, Jimmy. Wait, Jimmy.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. The number is to call tonight, 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I'd like to say hello to everyone who's listening to us around the country on radio stations around the country. Also, those who are listening on TalkStreamLive.com and Aftermath.fm. By the way, give the gift of Ground Zero this Christmas with our subscriptions for Aftermath.media. Whole library and our digital playground is ready for you if you want to subscribe. It's amazing. It keeps the show on the air, and it makes us happy because a lot of people say it's the best money they've ever spent. It's just it's an amazing trip, and it's addictive too. You just go to Aftermath.media. That's Aftermath.media and subscribe. We have low prices right now for the Christmas season, so you can get right in and subscribe and subscribe for the whole year. You'll be able to get Ground Zero at your disposal whenever you need to. A lot of old shows and a lot of other shows too, not just Ground Zero, but a lot of old shows that are there too. Old, other shows that have their podcasts and all of the other archive shows. So go to Aftermath.media. That's Aftermath.media. So as far back as last week, listeners have been sending me emails asking me when I was going to do a Krampus show. Well, I figured since I'm busily planning this, we're going to have a Krampus party tomorrow. There's a bar in town called the Paradise, and we haven't done a Krampus party in a while. I think it's been about a year, 2 years. Finally, we decided we're going to have a Krampus party. And this is something, that I've done. It's kind of a tradition. I've been doing Krampus parties ever since I first told the story of Krampus at a Christmas party that was thrown by a colleague of mine. It was a listener party. And it was funny because, I went to the party and I was drinking, having a good time. And he walked up to me and he said, "Clyde, I need you to say a few words at the party." And I looked at him and said, I don't think I can do it. I'm kind of too drunk to even speak. And he said, no, it's going to be fine. All you got to do is just stand up, do a stand-up routine, make people laugh, do something, sing, there's a band here, you can do whatever you want. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? These impromptu things sometimes, it puts you on the spot. You can't necessarily, you can't think of anything until it's time. They hold the mic in front of you and say, well, Clyde, go ahead and tell us what's going on. And he's like, okay. So the mic was handed to me. And, Clyde's going to say a few words about Christmas. He's going to tell us a good Christmas story. And I'm thinking, well, what am I going to tell them? I can't do 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, and I can't do Scrooge, and I can't do any of that stuff. So I thought that I would take a moment and make it a ground zero story. So I recalled the story my German grandmother and aunt told me about Krampus. I figured that no one heard of Krampus, or what is called the Christmas demon. I mean, I told the story anyway. And as I told the story, I noticed that the bar became very quiet. No one said a word as I was telling the story of the cold winter nights and that a large hairy beast with horns would break into homes, kidnap the bad children, and then beat them. And I said, this is why you better watch out and you better not cry, because if Krampus comes, chances are you're going to die. So at the end of the story, there was, dead silence. I mean, you could hear the heaters in the bar on because it was so quiet. And then there was one clap, and then two, and then the whole bar applauded. And in the end, I was told that what I had to say was terrifying and that no one had ever heard of Krampus. Well, the wait is over now. I mean, you can drag out the Dickens and hear some ghost stories, or we can just go for the throat and tell you about how Krampus is the Christmas egregore that we deserve right now. I mean, both stories, the Dickens story, the story of Scrooge and the story of Krampus, they need to be told now. I think they're more relevant now than they've ever been before. I think Scrooge is nearly 200 years old, and Krampus, that goes back to the pagan era. For decades, our Christmas stories, like 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and A Christmas Carol, they've reinforced America's Christmas ethos, depicting the season as a time for generosity and kindness and joy. But once you reach a certain age, Christmas pop culture gets predictably repetitive, and all these Christmas TV specials you can name off the top of your head are designed to inspire nostalgia and joy. And the same can be said for a traditional Christmas movie, like you sit around and watch It's a Wonderful Life or some other Christmas movie, or you're stuck on the Hallmark Channel for some reason. But if you listen to the radio, it just is aggravating sometimes when you hear Christmas music in October. Many of the songs are secular. They really don't sing much about baby Jesus. And usually we hear about 5 of the same songs being sung by many artists who want to make a buck off the season. And somebody had pointed out to me that they haven't heard Little Drummer Boy this year. And I thought, oh, well, there's a reason why. Is because the reality is that if Mary was trying to get Jesus to be quiet, and she was feeling like all tired because she just went into labor, I'm sure the guy coming by beating on drums was not something she was enjoying all that much. And there are a lot of Jewish artists that sing Christmas songs. I just figured, well, business is business. And so, radio stations plague us with the same repetitive tripe and people eat it up. And the cancel culture, the cancel culture has a problem right now. And I was reading about this the other day. They have a problem with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, saying that it's racist and that it promotes the bullying of people who are different. Songs like Baby It's Cold Outside, that becomes an object of scorn. As the Me Too movement said, the song was a bit rapey. And now we're seeing that there needs to be a black Santa to counter the racist white Santa, which is funny because we aren't seeing Asian Santa or Latino Santa begging for the spotlight. It's because we're told that black children need a Christmas character they can identify with. I don't know how we've gotten this far. I mean, no one has to relate with Santa. He's the big guy, right? The one who watches you to see if you've been good or bad. But does Santa carry out all the bad stuff when he sees children misbehaving? Well, no. He leaves that up to the bad cop of Christmas. That's Krampus, the Christmas demon. It's that time of year where children cower, grown-ups revel, and as the night falls, This goat demon named Krampus treads through the snow, tongue lolling, chains jingling, with a basket on his back ready to lug misbehaving kids directly to hell. Tonight we talk about Krampus and several other ghost stories at Christmas. 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero, and we'll be back. Listening to Ground Zero. I'm Clyde Lewis. In ancient times, a dark, hairy, horned beast was said to show up at the door to beat children and carry them off in his sharp claws. The Krampus. The Krampus could be heard in the night by the sound of his echoing cloven hooves, his rattling iron chains, his moaning at the moon. And the strangest part was that he was in league with Santa Claus. Now, historians remain unsure as to the exact origins of the Krampus figure in folklore, but it is believed that, like Santa, Krampus predates Christianity, stemming from Norse and Alpine traditions and Germanic paganism. Like many legendary characters, including St. Nicholas himself, Krampus' image has evolved over time and throughout regions, but Krampus represented a balance of light and dark, providing a harmony between good and evil. The story of this beast is based in the Alpine monsters that would hide in the winter snows. Late at night, with the snow crisp and white, people in villages would hear the sounds of night beasts, and many would say that they're wendigos in the woods, or even denizens of hell. It is believed that the long-horned, shaggy, goat-like monster with a long, angry face and lolling forked tongue would visit the home of misbehaving children to punish them. It was believed that he would give beatings and kidnap the kids and bring them down to his underworld lair to live for a year. According to centuries-old legends, if a child misbehaved, St. Nicholas, in his omniscience, would know and send his associate Krampus. It was said that this dark partner with a serpentine tail would turn up to the house during the Christmas season to punish the wicked child. He would beat him with a bundle of birch sticks, whip them with horsehair, and throw him into a sack or wicker basket to take him down to hell for a year. In some strange synchronicity, I was sent some sounds of a creature that was howling in the winter night, and these were recorded in St. Louis County, Missouri. They're chilling, and I think they set the mood for the Krampus riding in the cold night air. At this point, most people know Krampus. A lot of people know who Krampus is. The mythical Christmas demon has become part of the mainstream in the United States. No one knows exactly when he traveled from Europe to America, but he was a subject of a major motion picture back in 2015. The Krampus is a monster that's typically portrayed as a hairy demon with black-brown fur, cloven hooves, great goat horns, and a long pointed tongue and fangs. And quite often, he's depicted as having one human foot and one cloven hoof, as opposed to two hooves. Krampus punishes naughty children during the Christmas season, often traveling alongside good old St. Nicholas. The Krampus myth dates back to pre-Germanic paganism. He was originally the son of Hel, the Norse goddess of the underworld. Traditionally,
He comes on December 5th along with St. Nicholas. While St. Nicholas puts candy in the shoes of good children and birch twigs in the shoes of the bad, Krampus will instead beat children with his birch branches, and sometimes he will even make these children disappear, stuffing them into his sack and taking them back to his lair to be tortured or eaten. Now, if this story sounds familiar to you, it's because, well, I theorize that Krampus is connected to Moloch, who is this horned god of child sacrifice, which is also connected to Saturn or Kronos, the Greek god who ate his children. Moloch represents Saturn, and coincidentally, Christmas, a holiday for children, happens to be during the Feast of Saturnalia. I believe Krampus has more to do with the horned god of child sacrifice than that of Satan, but Krampus traditionally would murder the bad children by throwing them in his sack or hiding them in a basket to drown or beat to death later. Some people believe that this idiom of going to hell in a handbasket is from the legends of Krampus. It's important to note that as we prepare for the dark solstice, there is the tradition of the return of the Dark Father, which is Saturn, who is also connected to Satan and his many functions. Saturn is the god of judgment. Saturn is the father of time. The Saturnalia festivities are deeply rooted in the festival of the new year or the new sun, and it is the way to take negative influences and change them into a positive. Saturn was also considered a negative influence and is intrinsically associated with man's limitations, death, blight, and decay. Father Time has always been depicted as a white-haired, bearded entity that carries on this hourglass inside. That's why when you look at Santa Claus and you look at Father Time, they look almost similar because they're kind of an amalgamation of all. The legends tend to bring together the images that we see. Bearded Father Time looks like a mirrored version of Santa, or Rubizal. This entity would gather the children for the Yule sacrifice. Traditional depictions of the Grim Reaper come from the image of Father Time, and there's a reminder there of man's mortality. Charles Dickens, who wrote A Christmas Carol, he added this element of the paranormal, and he did it to convey a lesson. His four ghosts that appear to Ebenezer Scrooge, they're very aggressive, and they torment him in the nights prior to Christmas Day. Now, Marley, his partner in crime, was a frightening specter that looked hideous and inhuman. The ghost of Christmas Present appears just prior to the arrival of the ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. He lifts his heavy cloak, and he reveals two emaciated children with hollowed-out black eyes. And he calls the boy Ignorance, and the girl is called Want. Now, on the forehead of the boy was a mark. The mark meant doom. And when Dickens wrote his tale of Ebenezer Scrooge, the old miser, it was estimated that nearly half of all funerals in London were for the children, and many of those children were under the age of 10. They would be interred in paupers' cemeteries, and in those times there was a story about graveyard watchers. They're called the Elancu. The Elancu was draped and hooded to hide his pale, wiry frame. The legend comes from the old Celtic legends of Brittany, or the Lesser Britain. In the 19th century and early 20th centuries, legends would persist that the hooded figure would sometimes appear at Christmas Eve Mass, and if you were touched by his cloak, you would die within the year. And there are many of historians that would write in their journals that Elancu would appear after the appearance of comets and fireballs. And if anyone was to see the hooded figure in their town would be cursed with plague and dysentery. And Dickens used this figure to represent the future because death was inevitable in times of greed and ignorance. See, the hooded figure of Christmas Yet to Come was just as much a threatening spirit as was the spirit of Krampus. And, of course, that spirit would say nothing, but it basically threw Scrooge from shadow after shadow of the future, keeping him in horror and torment until he showed him what he would become. And what everybody usually becomes, and that is dead and forgotten. He would be dead, carrying the burden and chains of a damned soul, just like his friend Jacob Marley. Damned souls have a tendency to be angry and full of wrath. They are the aggressive, darker spirits that in life may have been troubled, unruly, menacing, violent, even murderous. These dark archetypes we talk about, or we have talked about before with Carl Jung. He expressed that a lot of humans have inherited a set of primordial images that are buried deep in the collective unconscious, and they appear when we least expect them to. 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero, and we'll be back.
Christmas Eve, all who believe Santa is here, but once a year, all girls and boys dream of new toys. Soundly they sleep, wishes to keep. Magic the strides, sounds come alive. Snow in the air, laughter to share. Breaths on the doors, stockings and more.
This congregation accuses Santa Claus of forcing people deep into debt with an orgy of gifts and blame him for the corruption of Christmas.
And festive and fun. Now, what do you have in Austria?
Christmas is a different thing. We have sort of the precursor to Santa Claus on the 6th of December, Saint Nicholas, that's the day, and on the eve of that day, we do the proper thing. We try to keep kids in order and in their place, and we have Krampus. And Saint Nicholas comes with praise and presents and wisdom.
And Krampus?
Krampus with a stick, a bag, and he threatens you with, if you weren't good, you get stuck in the bag and hit and shipped off.
Aside from saying he'd been nice and asking for a new toy, Noah got a few letters mixed up and addressed his note to the naughtiest fellow of all. No, not the Grinch, but the guy with the horn.
That is a greater power, especially on a night such as this.
Father Christmas perhaps will sick his little elves on me, or maybe his reindeer will stomp all over my body.
Are we here to praise the Lord? Or are we here to unwrap presents?
Other powers greater than that. Folks magic. You are forbidden to use that.
There are still people that dabble in the dark arts today.
I am conjuring Krampus voice.
This I respectfully and humbly ask in your name, Lord Satan. May you deem me worthy, Father.
I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero. Krampus, that hairy demon that lurks in the woods at night, and of course his night has come. It's definitely a horrifying Christmas story, and especially now when, as I said before, someone had sent me these moans and growls from St. Louis County, Missouri. Just listen to this. That's really terrifying. We're going to go to the calls now. Let's go to 503-225-0860. Travis in New Hampshire. Hi, Travis. You're on Ground Zero.
Hey, thanks, Clyde. I wanted to talk about, obviously, the subject, which is Krampus. So first thing I want to say is that the game Call of Duty right now they came out with an event like today, and it's called the Krampus event. So I thought that was interesting that it came out on the same day of your show, which you're doing about the Krampus story. Also, secondly, so they said that they called Krampus like the creature of the woods. But didn't that go back to like what they called Pan in Greek mythology?
Well, it's the horned being. It's but this one, he's supposed to be like the bad cop to Santa's good cop. But yeah, you go back to all those pagan mythologies of the horned satyr, the Pan. You have Pan, who also is a goat man. But
right.
It's evolved, and I think a lot of it is mixed with, like I say, the alpine woodland demons or the alpine woodland monsters mixed in with
also,
the
I
old
heard
idea.
That the alpine.
What's that?
I heard the alpine folk stories. They described Krampus as like an assistant to Saint Nicholas.
Right, and one of the things it is. He shows up and he takes the kids away that are bad. Santa does not offer any punishment. He lets Krampus do all that. And what I find interesting is that, while Krampus has been cartoonized, he's kind of been Disney-fied a little bit because of the film that they made about him. And in fact, you see him in a lot of cartoons now. Right. I read somewhere, and it was really interesting, that Krampus is not based on any historical figure, and that anyone who described Krampus would say that he was 3 times bigger than a human being. So it's like, again, we go back to the crypto critters of long tails, talking about abominable snowmen and yetis and Bigfoot and Sasquatch and maybe even Wendigos. And we talked about the Wendigo before.
One quick question now. Do you know if is there any pre-Christian stories that you may know of that might describe Krampus?
Moloch. The horn god of child sacrifice. Yeah, I mean, you go back.
Moloch.
Yeah,
Moloch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Krampus is a horned being, and he basically takes children away and beats them or eats them, depending on what part of the country you live in, what part of the legend you believe in.
So this would go into like child sacrificing and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think it's connected. I think you look back at Carthage, you look back at all the times of the Phoenicians. I think that, you look at, even in the Bible, you find stories of the decoration of trees. And even at one time, they made little gingerbread men, or they made, cookies that looked like little kids, so they didn't sacrifice them. They basically ate them to remember the children at Children Mass. Yeah, they ate the cookies.
Wow, that's interesting. I never knew that, Clyde. Thank you.
You bet. Have a good night. Take care. Let's go to Johnny. Let's go to Johnny in North Carolina. Hi, Johnny. You're on Ground Zero.
Oh, man, I tell you, these Krampus stories, any of the local grown stories like that, they're aimed at like the bad kids that are always thrown into the prison. What do they call it?
Yeah,
Get Straight program, something like that.
Get Straight program. It's the Christmas version of Get Straight. I agree with that. That's
yes,
funny.
It is.
Yeah.
You reserve this story for those kids, and whether or not there's something out there in the wilderness, there are places still to this day, and I live close to some of them. You can take a child, 13, 14, and leave them, and the elements would take them, and it is a genuinely scary thing. And it goes back to that nature scare, just being alone in the woods, being basically by yourself, and those demons that you see that pop up in your head. This perfectly mixes with that hallucinogen show you did the other night.
Oh yeah,
that is one of the faces you see, is that twisted demon face.
Well, and remember we were talking about what they call them, the Hex, the what they call the winter hags. There are stories about winter hags that follow Krampus as well. So it's hard to describe whether or not Krampus would be more of a fairy folk type, or that he certainly is a demon from hell. But they never really come right out and say that he's a demon from hell. But he certainly looks like one. He certainly acts like one. But then when you look at him, he's all covered in fur. He's 3 times bigger than a human being. He looks like some sort of a mutated creature, a crypto creature, that would be similar to either Bigfoot or the Wendigo. So it's this fine line where I'm thinking this is where the legend came from. The legend came from hearing strange howls in the night, or growls in the farmhouse, chickens dying, eggs being stolen, milk being drank, that kind of thing. And so they attributed it to some sort of a legend to scare the kids, and saying, look, if you continue to be bad, this creature is going to show up at the house. He's going to suck all the blood out of the chickens. He's going to eat all the eggs, and we're not going to have anything for Christmas dinner. So, I mean, you see how it evolves over time. And here in the United States, now that we have Krampus with us, he's been around for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years. And that's the scary part, is that this creature has been around, and it hasn't been until the commercialization of Christmas and the idea that people find a cynical route to say, well, I believe that the reason why the world's going to hell in a handbasket, to use that idiom, is because of Krampus. That's interesting. It's kind of bizarre. 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero, and we'll be back. Another synchronicity for you. Derek sent me an email, and he was telling me that, I was talking about how Krampus, shows up during the sightings of strange lights in the sky. You look at comets that come by, and tonight, believe it or not, Comet Leonard is going to be visible in the northern hemisphere. It's going to pass near Venus. The comet can be seen shortly after the sun goes down in the southwest sky. It's very low above the horizon, and if you look, the brightest star out there is Venus. And so the comet will be making its closest approach, and it should be, it's already passed, I think, in some areas, but I think you can still catch it if you're in the western hemisphere or the western areas. The comet is traveling within 2.6 million miles of Venus. So the bright comet it made its closest approach to Earth just a few days ago. So we're looking about, 21 million miles or 34 million kilometers, give or take. So given Venus's brightness and prominence in the night sky, the planet, if you look for it, you'll be able to locate the comet. What I find interesting is it's passing in front of Venus, and Venus has been known as the star that fell, Lucifer, literally. So we have not only the glimpse at Saturn or the Saturnalian celebrations and the arrival of Krampus, but we also have this comet that would pass over near Lucifer. And like I said, you look at all of the, personages. You see the demon, the growing demon, the hairy demon, bigger than a human being, appearing in times of strife, times of stress, and warning children that if they don't behave, they'll be beaten and killed. And this is the same story about Saturn, the same story about Cronus. Cronus told his children that, they had to behave or he would eat them. And he ate most of them, or he ate all of them except for Zeus. So the story about the passing of the year, the idea that Father Time has a scythe, just like the symbol is the death symbol, the same symbol that Charles Dickens used, it's a reminder to be on your best behavior. It's a reminder that no matter what you do, Father Saturn is always watching you. The Saturn return is what it is. The return of Saturn, the return of judgment, the return of where you'll be judged. And if you're bad, you're speedily drugged down to hell. If you're good, you get the good stuff from St. Nicholas, which is the representation of the good guy. And these are all, like I said, they're archetypes that, in fact, somebody brought up the DMT entities again. And it's true, because those DMT entities, people say, well, I was having an argument with somebody saying that these are entities you don't contact because that's a no-no in the Bible. No, these are entities that are in your subconscious or unconscious mind. These are archetypes, and they tend to remain buried within the unconscious mind, deep down in dreams, and we respond to them, and they're programmed into us through religion and art and literature and film. So the shadow archetype, according to Jung, is the most dangerous archetype of all, because shadow archetypes have a tendency
to invade your thoughts. And when those shadowy thoughts become groupthink, there's the possibility that through some quantum trick, a manifestation can take place, meaning that if you think long and hard about something, it can manifest. So the shadow archetype becomes a real breathing entity fortified with the groupthink that prolongs its life, and its image can be a harbinger to some other event that will eventually cause hardship. So Krampus is just one more reminder of what Christmas was. Krampus, at one time, represented the balance between light and dark, providing this harmony between good and evil, the balance, the duality. It's a good thing to remember that Krampus, while appearing to be a demon, is not the anti-Santa. But since ancient times, he has worked alongside Santa Claus to ensure that people had respect, behaved, and were good to each other. And that's kind of unorthodox because he's sort of a confidence trickster. But this still begs the question of why Krampus resonates so much with so many Americans and why they have latched onto it now. I was reading the Huffington Post, and they had an op-ed about Krampus, and it says Sonia Hallbeck wrote an entry, and she says, it's difficult to say exactly why the intrigue surrounding Krampus has skyrocketed, perhaps for a generation that grew up with Harry Potter and a pop culture that's always on the lookout for the next classic fantasy creature to reinvent, like a vampire, an elf, or a zombie. The time is finally right for this darker Christmas beast to emerge. So yes, Krampus has enjoyed a revival in recent years, buoyed by a prevailing cynical ethos that rejects the saccharine, sweet celebration of church and family at Christmas time and a slew of pop culture appearances in cartoons and in movies. Krampus has become a pop culture figure. We now see him on greeting cards, gift bags. He's made of chocolate, marzipan, dried fruit, stuffed animals. In any supermarket checkout this time of year, you can find something that is attributed to Krampus or the Christmas demon. But this whole popularity, I think, has some traditionalists worry that Krampus is becoming too commercialized, just like Santa Claus. The demon is actually meant to strike back at the Hallmark version of the holiday. But now he is living to see himself become that which his fans most detest. And the Europeans are actually disappointed of how we treat Krampus, because Krampus was never meant to be a demon. Krampus was meant to be an alpine snow monster of some kind. That basically there's always that possibility that if you go out in the woods alone at night, or if you sit alone in your cabin at night, Krampus could be at your door knocking and howling in the wind. And that's why, again, I wanted to play this for you, these sounds. These are, again, I said St. Louis, Missouri. No, it's St. Louis County, Minnesota. I thought I said Missouri before, but no, it's St. Louis County, Minnesota. This was recorded, and it's just synchronistic that it was recorded at a time when I was about to speak of Krampus. Krampus usually doesn't act alone. He has a lot of other creatures that do his bidding the night before Christmas, although his legend is there to spook children, the young and the young at heart. Half goat, half man, 3 times the size of a man. Following St. Nicholas, or appearing before St. Nicholas, he comes around to visit children on Christmas Eve. Specifically, the tale of Krampus hails from Austria. It's not difficult to imagine a horned goat-like man coming out of the foothills or descending from the mountains, standing at your window, scratching on the glass, wondering if you've been bad or good. Tonight is the night of Krampus on Ground Zero. 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. Back with more Ground Zero. Don't go away. It's a well-known fact that controversial talk show hosts have recently been censored and even banned on the internet by corporate and political interests. Hey guys, it's Clyde Lewis from Ground Zero. And in order to counter the suppression of information, we've decided to create our own private digital playground called Aftermath. It's an exclusive online multimedia library featuring a social media platform, videos, audio clips, archive shows, research groups, documents, and a news aggregator. In addition, we're hosting other Ground Zero-friendly podcasts like Conspirafact with Wes and Bill, Into the Microcosm with Jimmy Jean, Para-Awareness with Mr. Gates and Isaac Weishaupt, Opposing Perspective with James Ponder, The Infinite Fringe with Billy Ray Valentine, and several more shows. Mobile apps for Android and Apple are available too. The monthly subscription for Aftermath is only $10 a month. The yearly special for new subscribers during the month of July is only $79 a month. You save almost $40. Sign up now by going to aftermath.media. Again, that's aftermath.media.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Spinning complacently in the darkness, covered and blinded by a blanket of little lives, false security has lulled the madness of this world into a slumber. Wake up, an eye is upon you, staring straight down and keenly through, seeing all that you are and everything that you can never be. Yes, an eye is upon you, an eye ready to blink. So face forward, with arms wide open and mind reeling. Your future has arrived. Are you ready to go?
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, the loudspeaker spoke up and said, the loudspeaker spoke up and said, give up, give up, give up, give up, give up.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. The number is to call tonight, 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. So like I said in the last hour, I've gotten emails and posts on Facebook asking, when am I going to do a show about Krampus? Every year it's a tradition, Ground Zero talks about Krampus, the history of Krampus, and it's just a chilling story. And usually I love it because, for all that are damn depressed when it's time to take down the Halloween decorations, and if you loathe the sound of jingles playing nonstop in the aisle of your Costco store, Halloween's revenge can be found in those scary ghost stories and the story of the huge, hairy, demon-looking monster called Krampus. The celebration of Christmas has always been centered on children. We know this. It's not fun unless there are children in the room. It's not fun unless you can see children smile in the malls and children, with their bright eyes looking for Santa Claus. But it's unfortunate that the frills of Christmas are like bait. They're like bait and trappings for something sinister, something bad, something that would be considered commercial or ignoring Jesus or, whatever bothers you about Christmas. There's always something, right? And it can be argued that Christmas is a training ground for great disappointment and mistrust, especially when, parents tell you about Santa Claus, or you learn yourself about Santa Claus, or what Santa Claus is, or the background of Santa Claus. In fact, there's actually a movement where parents believe that perhaps it's time to come clean about Christmas and Santa and all of the mythology surrounding the holiday, teaching it as a myth, not as a reality. But in my opinion, I think it would be best just to keep Santa in a place where he needs to be. Jolly old elf, we remember from Clement Seymour's poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And yes, Virginia, that would even include the pipe that he smokes because, well, I was reading that there are a lot of people that are Grinches, right? And there was actually a movement to remove any references to Santa smoking a pipe in the old "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" poem. I mean, it's always uncomfortable to say to people that, the origins of Christmas celebrations are evolutionary. They're all evolutionary. Things change, that certain characters disappear, certain characters are brought back, and one of the characters brought back is Krampus. And when you look at pagan rites, you look at Wiccan rites, you look at Luciferian celebrations, all of this dealing with the light. All this dealing with the removal of the light and the return of the light. That's why we have Christmas lights and baubles and bangles, and we have Christmas trees and all this, because the whole fantasy within the mythology is all about the war between God and the devil. And in some ways, it's also a ritualistic way of remembering the return of the Dark Father, or depending on what path you're on, the left-hand or right-hand path. There's the Dark Father return or the return of Jesus. In fact, the return of Santa Claus every year, and someone had pointed this out to me. I did an interview with somebody who had told me that the Santa Claus event, the idea of Santa coming down from the sky and giving gifts to those who have been good, and the Krampus story of the devil, many people are saying that the story was just derivative of the story of the apocalypse, and that over time it was manipulated by the Illuminists, because look, if you look at the book of Revelation, chapter 19, verse 13, Christ, the Son of God, is described as returning from the skies in light and glory, wearing robes dipped in blood. So think about that for a moment. You see this bearded man coming down from the sky wearing robes that are red. And there are many people who see this as manipulation and even a simulacrum of evil and deception. And again, we hear the great deception where they're saying that we will be somehow fooled or somehow manipulated or misled by a great deception, which will characters and creatures from the sky are going to come down from heaven telling us that they're gods. So when you look at the Yule is the promise of the return of light, set aside at a time, believe it or not, in the old celebrations. It was about the offering of a child to the horn god Moloch. Pope Gregory advised St. Augustine to allow his converts certain festivals, as formerly they had done this in honor of the devil, the demon. And St. Augustine permitted the usual December celebration under a new name. And these early pagan ceremonies are derived from the many English holiday customs that we have to this day. So when you're looking at Nicholas, or you look at the name of Nicholas given to the red-suited bearded man, also has been derived from the devilish origins, because Old Nick, you've ever heard the devil being called Old Nick? It was always, Old Nick was the devil. And some people say, well, Santa's an anagram for Satan. Well, Nick is taken from the old European name Nikon, meaning to murder or to slay, inferring that the old saying that Satan was actually the murderer from the beginning. Santa in the beginning had an alter ego, and that was Baal's Nick or Baal's Nickel, the murdering assassin of Baal, the horned god of sacrifice. Again, we see the comparisons to Krampus, which is a horned and hairy devil, who would visit children that would not behave. His job was to kidnap children, beat them with a switch, and sometimes eat them. And by the way, Krampus is a German word meaning old claws. Krampus is the mirroring entity of the ancient Phoenician god Moloch. That's what I think. I think that the tradition's gotten down for thousands of years. That's actually traditions that mirror a lot of the Christmas traditions. Believe it or not, they can be found in the Old Testament thousands of years before Christ. If you open the Bible to Isaiah, you read about the ancients placing idols of worship under a tree. They inflame themselves near the evergreen trees
and sacrifice their children in the sanctuaries in front on idols. That's in chapter 57 of Isaiah. They talk about inflaming themselves under evergreen trees and sacrificing their children in sanctuaries in front of idols. They did so in the Valley of Ben Hinnom in the 1920s. There was an explorer that found 6,000 funerary urns in Carthage, and they were sacrificed in the sanctuary of Tanit. So when you're looking back at ancient times, the Phoenicians in Carthage and elsewhere, they had a reputation for sacrificing children. One adventure explorer said that children were killed in order to provide safety from evil entities and to ensure that the sun would return. This would bring peace and goodwill to all men, according to ancients. So what was it that was at these sanctuaries? Well, believe it or not, a large stone idol that looks very much like Krampus. 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero, and we'll be back. Last night I touched on the graven images that they're erecting in places like the UN and Rockefeller Center, and that the Pope gave the okay for them to erect a statue dedicated to Moloch, which is this horned god that, if you go back to the times of the Phoenicians in Carthage, they would sacrifice children to this in these sanctuaries, again, under the trees near Tanit. Where, of course, they speak about in the Old Testament, where they would decorate the trees and then they would offer sacrifices under the fir trees or and they would burn large fires. They would gather at this sanctuary, large stone idol. It had the head of a horned bull, a horned god, maybe a goat, I don't know, but it just looked like a demon, of course, and what would happen is there were arms, mechanical arms on this god, and they place a child in the arms. The ropes and pulleys would raise the arms into heaven, and the child would fall out of the arms into a pile of burning oak. And this was a gift under the trees to Moloch. The gift to Moloch would be in exchange for the birth of the sun, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. Later, the practice was abandoned. However, there were various sects that would create child effigies. They would bake cookies, or they would have dolls that would be used in the ritual instead. They would, take a cookie and eat it in remembrance of the children. And, of course, there was a ritual where they used dolls instead of children. And there's also a celebration called Childermass, where they talk about the blood of the children, the loss of the children. So the tradition of giving dolls for mock sacrifice was often given in the wintertime. So part of the Saturnalia rites, namely remembering how Saturn, who in mythology ate his children, the pagans took those little biscuits, shaped like little human beings, and they were edible cookies. And then, of course, that evolved into the tradition of baking gingerbread men. And in the sanctuaries, there was this, they were there, they gathered under the trees, and they exchanged gifts and dolls and everything. And that's why I'm thinking that this evolution, like I say, everything about Christmas is evolutionary. You got this dark, hairy, horned beast that was said to show up at the door to beat children at Christmas, and then he carries them off with his sharp claws. Krampus, the Krampus could be heard in the night by the sound of his echoing cloven hooves and the rattling iron chains. The strangest part that he was a companion to Santa Claus, and historians are unsure, where he came from. The beast, of course, is based on the alpine monsters that would hide in winter snows. Late night, the snow crisp and white, wendigos and other creatures that would moan and howl at the moon, sounding like they are the denizens of hell. It's funny, when I was putting the show together, it took me a few days to do the research, and I was putting the show together because we were planning a party that we were we're having a party tomorrow night at a bar called Paradise, where we're going to have a Krampus party. We're inviting everybody locally to come out and have fun with us. But I was thinking to myself, what would make this Krampus show special? What would make it stand out? And then someone sent me something. It was amazing. It was these howls that were recorded in a place called St. Louis County, Minnesota. And somebody sent me saying, is this Bigfoot? Is this Krampus? Is this the Wendigo? And I thought I would play it for you, maybe have you decide what we're listening to. Listen to this. And what is even more synchronistic is the fact that tonight, if you look up into the heavens, you see a comet passing near Venus. Venus is also known as Lucifer. So just the idea of something howling, looking up at the night sky in the cold, just adds one more dimension to what I'm talking about tonight. Chills every time I hear it. But see, that's the whole thing, is that, what is out there in the cold, moaning, that loud moan, sounds painful, sounds almost human, almost like a werewolf. And I always say winter's for werewolves, winter's for the Wendigo, and winter is also for Krampus. But Krampus, of course, he has his limitations. We all know that, we don't have Krampus suiting up to greet kids like a mall Santa. But, he wouldn't seem all that welcome if he showed up at your door at a Christmas party, hunched over, ready to take the children away who are bad. But if we look at what Krampus represents, he's just another one of those dark figures that teaches a lesson. It's like what Charles Dickens tried to do when he told his ghost stories with Christmas Carol. I mean, we think of Christmas Carol as a cozy piece of traditional seasonal storytelling with, steaming potatoes and a goose that's hanging in the window. And, of course, it gives us a lesson to be taught about, not being stingy at Christmas. But, there's a lot of, believe it or not, there's a lot of political element that went into A Christmas Carol. And I'm thinking there's a lot of political element going into Krampus as well, because you look at what Krampus represented to the Austrians and the Germans. Basically, he was resurrected to be the symbol of fascism, not letting fascism at your door at Christmas time. And then you look at Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. He wrote it, in the 1840s? I think it was like 1843 he wrote it. And what he was doing when he wrote A Christmas Carol was he was delivering a far more serious and possibly, in his opinion, freshly relevant warning about the moral bankruptcy of a society that destroys human lives in pursuit of a profit. I mean, he was delivering a message to the powers that be that they should not exploit the hardships of people to gain control of them. Now, doesn't that sound relevant? Very relevant for our time, doesn't it? I mean, it's not just a personal morality tale. It's not just about Ebenezer Scrooge. It's a raw and impassioned warning to, well, at the time, his fellow Victorians, of the collective responsibility human beings have for one another, and the potential danger that exists in exactly the social forces that Marx would be dissecting soon. Karl Marx. So literally, I mean, even before Marxism was even discussed, the idea of preventing something. He's kind of, I mean, Charles Dickens is kind of like the George Orwell of Christmas. And he used a lot of paranormal elements to tell his stories. Because he was a news reporter. He was a storyteller. He was
before a Fortean even existed, I'm sure he would be considered a Fortean. So, maybe if you look at Krampus in a different light, maybe if you look at Scrooge or even the entire story of A Christmas Carol in a different light, you may see that it is an impassioned warning to all of us now, as the story itself, is 200 years old. Nearly 200 years old. Not quite, but nearly 200 years old. Charles Dickens and Krampus and the Ghost of Christmas Present, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. Ghost of Christmas Past was all about Scrooge. The Ghost of Christmas Present was all about what's happening in the time of Scrooge, but Yet to Come was something that was a little bit more like the Krampus story, where if you don't watch out and if you don't take care of yourself, you'll wind up dead and forgotten. 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero, and we'll be back.
You might catch a glimpse of a horned figure stalking through the streets. With a basket strapped to its back and switch in hand, the demonic Krampus isn't interested in giving out gifts, but doling out brutal punishments. Krampus is the dark foil to St. Nicholas, the miraculous Catholic bishop credited with bringing small gifts of sweets, nuts, and fruit to good little boys and girls in early December. And yes, one of the inspirations behind jolly old you know who.
I understand. You are the spirit of Christmas future. And because we can never know the future, you are not allowed to speak.
Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero. It's time to drag out the Dickens and talk about Krampus. You know, when Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, they had a sort of a demon problem of their own at that time, about the 19th century England. Tales of demon-like characters were told, including the tale of Spring-Heeled Jack, a small demonic gnome that was able to leap into the air and terrorize people. Some say that Spring-Heeled Jack was a horned, oily-skinned blue demon with a pointed head. Some say he spewed forth a blue flame from his mouth and that he had sandy, hooked claws that felt cold like a corpse. In the winter of 1855, after a light snowfall, it was reported that hoof-like marks appeared in the snow. The footprints measured 1.5 to 2.5 inches wide and 8 inches apart. The footprints were seen throughout the countryside for a total of 100 miles, and even though they would veer off at various points, the greater part of the hoof prints were moving forward in a straight line. Some of these hoof tracks were seen going up walls, on rooftops, haystacks, leading up to even the various drain pipes that some say were only 4 inches in diameter. Villagers of the south side of Devon, England, reported sightings of a horned devil-like figure walking around looking into windows. And many townspeople armed themselves and attempted to track down the beast responsible without success. As the Daily Mail reported back on March 13, 2009, Ancient Mystery returns, Satan's hoofprints spotted in Devon back garden. Apparently, back in 2009, scientists for the Center of Fortean Zoology said they saw footprints again. Footprints again of the demon of Devon. Some villagers blamed the church, who'd recently changed the standard prayer book, for letting the devil into their communities. Others blamed animals, pranksters, even a weather balloon. But the phenomenon described as the Great Devon Mystery was never explained. The prints did resemble those of a goat, and skeptics brought up the possibility that rabbits or even an escaped kangaroo from the local zoo may have caused them. Still, there is no explanation for the curious hoofprints in the snow. No explanation for the revisit or the resurrection of the demon of Devon. Now, this was the story of the demon of Devon. The story of Spring-Heeled Jack goes all the way back to the times of Ebenezer Scrooge and Charles Dickens. But, you know, if you read A Christmas Carol, I mean, we always say, well, that's a great story every year. It's up there with It's a Wonderful Life. It's got, you know, all the trappings of you must be generous at Christmas or you may die or whatever. When Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in 1843, he was delivering a far more serious and possibly freshly relevant warning about the moral bankruptcy of society that destroys human lives in pursuit of profit. Dickens' story of Scrooge was not just a tale of morality. It was raw and impassioned. It was a warning to the people of the collective responsibility that we have for one another and the potential danger that exists in exactly what comes with a Marxist or socialized world. Dickens was worried about the rampant injustices in his society, not simply out of the sense of empathy and outrage, but out of fear. He was convinced that the grotesque imbalances of wealth and power that endured at the time of his writing might end up tearing the fabric of society apart. The 1840s, known as the Hungry 40s, were years of financial confusion, recession, poverty, and unrest throughout much of the developed world. In the United States, the boom of 1836 was followed by the Panic of 1837. There was an Irish potato famine at the time, the Great Hunger. Many people died of starvation. Social injustice was becoming unhinged and self-defeating in its extremity. In 1834, the Malthusian New Poor Law had dehumanized and institutionalized poverty. The law forced anyone needing welfare to enter a workhouse, and any refusal to do so meant starvation. The new wave of workhouses produced as a result of the act were places of nightmare, more closely resembling concentration camps than refuges for the needy. Families were forcibly separated. Parents assumed to have relinquished all rights over the responsibilities for their children. Segregation by age and gender was enforced. Personal belongings and clothing were confiscated until discharge. People around the world were rioting because of lack of resources. Children were so numerous in the workplace for one reason only, and that's because they were cheap. On average, earning only 20% of an adult's wage while working the same hours. A child as young as 5 could work 14 hours a day in conditions of squalor and acute danger. And many such children died of industrial accidents or disease. So the rising toll of human misery was almost beyond measuring. Its social implications clear to anyone who had eyes to see. And the book, Christmas Carol,
Came out December 19th, 1843. It sold out very quickly. But the high cost of production and legal fees spent on contesting a pirated edition meant he saw only modest profit initially from the book. Readers loved its nostalgic and sentimental celebration of Christmas and warmed the easy redemption of its protagonist, Ebenezer Scrooge. But the wider message did not then, and maybe not since, receive such a recognition. Beyond the simple framing of what Dickens did with Ebenezer Scrooge's journey through his own life and the world he inhabits, he used it as a device to explore the grotesque and dangerous inequalities of contemporary society. Scrooge's famous dismissal of the poor says it all. I was in A Christmas Carol. I played Scrooge at one time, and I remember the line where he said, "What then if they'd be like to die? They had better do it and decrease the surplus population." Talking about charities, and it's better the kids die to decrease the surplus population. It's very much like what we hear from Malthusian technocrats about the reduction in population due to COVID-19. Malthusian ideas have never escaped us. Look at Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci. 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero, and we'll be back. During the break, I was having a discussion with Wes, my producer. We were talking about that line about if they're likely to die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. He said the same thing about Tiny Tim. When Tiny Tim was, what's going to happen to Tiny Tim while he lives? It's better that he died than, so that they could decrease the... I mean, Malthusian ideas that are promulgated defend these resets. The idea that, it's natural and good for society to have the population go. It's natural and good for society that we don't treat those that didn't get vaccinated, that kind of stuff. We hear the same arguments today from the mouths of the super wealthy social Darwinians like Bill Gates, albeit differently worded and wrapped in this goofy laugh and all these faux environmental concerns we hear about. But of course, Dickens says, if you read in Dickens, it says something to the effect, I think it was the Ghost of Christmas Present said to Scrooge, he said, "If man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cannot until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is, will you decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven, you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child." Talking about Tiny Tim. So who knows? These the comeuppance of people like Gates and Fauci and Soros and all these guys. It's going to be something that they will suffer. I mean, right now, those who suffer, the average working class, they no sooner see us die than roll over and play dead. They would rather beat us with their rules and mandates than give us sound information about how to better our immune systems. We're currently dealing with the same social issues that Dickens would find, very recognizable. I mean, the very atmosphere that allegedly summons the tales of those alpine demons at Christmas time, like Krampus. Humanity finds itself sinking to a new low, where every evil that can be imagined can be formed into a monster that is welcomed in the cynical and angry world. Krampus is, Chris and Sheree Geo talked about egregores, so did Brad Olson. The idea that Krampus is the egregore that is manifesting in the toxic environment we're in now. He targets the children. He beats them into submission, much like children are being coerced into taking part in things they don't truly understand, like getting a vaccine. Why must I get a vaccine, Mom? Well, because somebody said you needed to get it. Well, what about all the people getting heart problems? Well, it doesn't matter. See, that's the thing, is that, you have these characters like Scrooge, and you have these characters like Krampus. And these are basically the presence of these characters, the overall character, if you will, of who they are, that many of these ideas about, taking something that's from the turn of the century and applying it now, a lot of people, think, well, we're too sophisticated to believe that nonsense. But mythologies exist for a reason. So Krampus's frightening presence was suppressed for many years. The Catholic Church actually forbade the idea of Krampus. And the fascists in World War II Europe found Krampus despicable because it was considered a creation of the Social Democrats. And I'm sure, given the climate we're in now, Krampus could easily become a political tool, but at the moment, he's been off limits, and people who are not too keen on traditional celebrations embrace Krampus with open arms. Krampus, like Scrooge, he's a mascot for what we don't want to invite into our consciousness. I mean, Scrooge, of course, had to go through the alchemical steps of the initiate in order to improve his life, but Krampus, well, Krampus arrives in times of strife and inner conflict. As I've been reading stories about Krampus, it just seems that the power and legend behind this demon of Christmas is becoming more palatable as we move through the 21st century. Celebrations of Christmas change. It's really not all that hard to imagine a day when Krampus will be too trendy and widely accepted as he would quite possibly seen as something as cuddly as a dog. Something as cuddly as a dog that's chained to the hip of Santa. And I don't know if we'd be able to even picture a time where not only is Santa sitting at the mall wanting to speak to kids, but Krampus is standing there as well, scaring kids into being good. You go through the whole idea of, you go through the pains of being taunted by Krampus, and then eventually you find the comfort and the serenity of being in the arms of Santa Claus. But then again, what is the demon Krampus known as? The demon with sandy claws or sandy hooks? I mean, the French have their version of Krampus, and he's a serial child killer. His name's Hans Trapp. He's like Freddy Krueger. He actually jumps into your dreams, and basically kills you while you're asleep. He actually looks like a scarecrow. That's a terrible thing. I mean, imagine having a dream about a guy who looks like a scarecrow who kills you in your dreams. And again, we go back to Christmas being the time of werewolves. I mean, especially in Romania, the practice of caroling in Romania corresponded to dressing up as animals, mostly wolves and demons and spirits. That way, and I don't know if you know this or not, but any child, and this is old legend, Romanian legend, that any child that is conceived or is born on Christmas Eve can be or will be cursed to become a werewolf. So the carolers that we hear about, the carolers serve to remind those who would not abstain from sexual activity on Christmas Eve that there's a price to be paid in blood for those who break the rules of Christmas. I mean, some people say there's no Santa Claus, and the primitive people would spin tall tales based on saints like St. Nicholas or even horned demons and little demonic goblins that can be found in ancient cultures and histories that are seldom talked about. But ancient cultures had these myths for a reason. And the solar eclipse, the winter solstice, darkness falling early, evil spirits, and strange creatures would enter our world through mirrors and stargates. The prevailing myth is that throughout Europe, demonic entities that followed or accompanied Santa were called the mirror opposites. And at night, you could hear them howling at the moon and the stars. See, Christmas has, I guess, literally cleaned up after about 200 years. And the darker stories are not shared that much in the United States anymore.
they remain in places like Iceland and Denmark and in European traditions. The cold winter air always invites the tales of ghosts and goblins and elves. And we had our show about elves, talking about those. I mean, Charles Dickens, when he wrote A Christmas Carol, he also said that Christmas time is that time where the veil is the thinnest, at the time of the Saturnalian judgment. That things happen in the sky that wouldn't normally happen. People would see things. They see ghosts and demons travel through the air, storms and howling winds at night. Yes, this is Christmas. And even though they cleaned it up, there is no mistaking that things get a little weird when you're not behaving the way you should. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Krampus is here. He's not going away anytime soon. 503-225-0860. It's 503-225-0860. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero, and we'll be back.
Is that a new music app?
Yeah, check it out. Surfer Music Discovery. It links to thousands of online stations, but the twist is you see the song names and artists that are now playing live.
That's different. No guessing. Looks like a waterfall of music.
So many formats. Rock, oldies, country, R&B, jazz, and a whole lot more.
How's that spelled?
Surfer. S-U-R-F-R.
Is it expensive?
It's free. No need to sign up or sign in.
Get the Surfer Music app free from Google Play or the App Store.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Join me on a journey where getting lost is the only true destination. For the past, present, and future all coexist on the same timeline. Where happiness is an illusion. This is the future we are in right now. Where our phones are the first things that we touch when we wake up, the last thing we touch before falling asleep. Radiant, seductive screens we so lovingly, endlessly gaze upon. Much like you're doing right now. All welcome to a future where our true reflection is only revealed once the screen goes dark. Welcome to the darkness. I hope you find it enlightening.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." The loudspeaker spoke up and said, "Wait, Jimmy." Give up. Give up. Give up. Give up. Give up.
I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. The numbers to call tonight, 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. I say it all the time. I'm not ready for winter. I never am ready for winter. Even as we're getting closer to Christmas, the cold is blowing its bitterness and the snow's clean to the ground. My sister in Salt Lake City was telling me they got hit with a big snowstorm there. And it eventually did snow in Colorado, from what I understand. But, you know, as last year we were talking about dark winter, and this winter is the winter of our discontent, we're in a very precarious position this year because a lot of people are happy at Christmas. I don't want to take that away from people. But there's a silent group who see the holidays as dark and foreboding. And this goes beyond bah humbug of Scrooge or the burglary of the Grinch. It may be the depression of some inflexible middle age or COVID or whatever. It's all staring at you, and you're like going, what do I do with it? I mean, they call this type of year the dark times. At least they used to. Where the soul is eclipsed, the body grows tired, weary of the cold and yearning for love. Childhood memories of boxes, bows, puppies, tinsel, all pounded away by the realities of debt and pressures of family and work. I can see that it's easy to be overwhelmed at this end of the year. Some dreams have gone unfulfilled, and potentiality is always something to lean on when things don't turn out the way they planned. As we scramble to various places to buy that last-minute gift or to visit family, we forget that Christmas is indeed a time of magic. Forces exist at this time of year that go beyond the story of the humble birth of a Messiah. It's a given that Christianity wants to keep a chokehold on the season because many fear that they are clutching on their faith like a covetous old skeptic. But we forget the real reason for this season, and that is using the goodness that is blessed, that has been given us as a blessing to ward off dark thoughts and dark futures and dark entities. Because it's the season to light the lights and cut through the darkness and share the old folk tales to those who want to hear them, not just the ones about ghosts that visit old misers or a bearded jolly fat man that delivers gifts. There are cautionary tales. They were created to remind us that the darkness of the season is invited in and the responsibility to drive it out is our responsibility. See, back 400 years ago, it was customary to open the windows and the doors of the household, banishing shadow entities into the howling winds of winter. A candle was lit in every household to protect it from the winter demons. Prayers were offered, and families would kneel on the cold floors praying that demons of the north would pass over their homes and give them yet another year of life. You know, it's odd that tonight, you know, I'm talking about Krampus. There are a lot of synchronicities. Somebody was telling me that a new video game is featuring Krampus. And not only that, but tonight, Comet Leonard is seen by a lot of people if the skies are clear. And as I've been playing all through the show, someone had pointed me in the direction of some strange howling that was going on in St. Louis County, Minnesota. And they said, you ought to play this because, of course, the Wendigo and stories of alpine demons like Krampus are rather terrifying to hear about this Christmas. And so are the howls and screams of a creature that sounds like it's in pain. Winter monsters are terrifying, especially with the cold air and the strange scratching on the windows we get from trees or from icicles that break in the night. So tonight we brought on someone who knows about the legends and the scares in the winter. That's Heather Mosier. She grew up in the foothills of the Appalachia. She's a classics professor, author, and researcher, along with being a producer of Small Town Monsters. Heather loves diving into all manner of spooky, creepy cryptids and the folklore related to all of it. In fact, she's got a podcast called The Lore You Know on Small Towns Monsters YouTube page. Heather Mosier, welcome to Ground Zero.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What a night, isn't it? This creepy screams out of Minnesota, and then, of course, we're talking about Krampus. You know, and it all goes back to, I would think that, you know, a lot of the stories of Krampus would be related to those, what we'd call the Wendigo or some other alpine creature that is legendary.
Well, Yeah, I guess I wouldn't think of the Wendigo necessarily with Krampus, but yeah, all of this is tied to, like you had mentioned earlier, the darkness of the year. I mean, we're coming up on the solstice, the longest night of the year, and where we're hoping that the harvest has supplied us with enough to get us through until spring when we can grow more crops. So it just kind of lends itself to these creepy stories and tales, and then words of warning as well for the children to kind of, stay out of the woods if you hear noises like that. Don't go out at dark and wander away, but also behave so that you don't get taken away or beaten by some sort of demon-like creature.
I was thinking to myself that, as I was talking in the last couple hours about how, the ghosts of Dickens and Krampus apply today because we're living in times of strife and also living in times of what we'd call scarcity and starvation. It's a lot like what Dickens wrote about in the 1840s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially right now, we're kind of in a time where, especially with the pandemic kind of being snapped back 100 years or more to times when things were more difficult, and a lot of times it feels like things are out of our hands or our direct control.
Exactly. And I've always thought to myself, and we've talked before on this program about things like tulpas and egregores and how sometimes they manifest from legends. And in times like these, people start seeing these creatures. We're going to talk more with Heather Mosier about some of the haunts of the Christmas season, including the ghosts and the demonic creatures like Krampus, and what they mean to our overall psyche, how it affects us on a spiritual level and even on a physical level. Heather Mosier with us tonight, and very excited to talk more. The Lore You Know on the Small Town Monsters YouTube page. We'll be back with more. Keep it here on Ground Zero. Heather Mosier's with us, producer for Small Town Monsters, has a podcast called The Lore You Know, talking about the origins of a lot of these, I guess you could call them the Christmas winter creatures, Krampus being one of them. Everything, Heather, in Christmas, when it comes to Christmas, is evolutionary, meaning that, it all starts from a humble beginning, and that's how we got Santa Claus. A lot of people believe that Santa and, at one time, Santa and Krampus were the same thing. How far back would you say that the Krampus legend goes?
Well, I mean, it goes back a long time. I mean, I don't have an exact date. Right. I'm not sure that we can actually pinpoint an exact date, but when you're thinking of Europe and old Austrian traditions, especially when you're looking at Krampus, and the precursor to that would be some sort of Germanic traditions or Celtic traditions going back even further. I mean, you can see elements of the creature, the physical elements, as far back as ancient Greece or Rome, as far as satyrs and even like Pan-type figures, just in the behavior of Krampus as well. But Krampus in the iteration that he is in now, I would say is, it's not ancient by classical history standards, right, but it is old compared to American standards.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up the like Pan and other what we call nature creatures, because it seemed to me the more I studied Krampus, because I was first acquainted with Krampus from my grandmother, my German grandmother, my aunt, who basically told us the stories of Krampus. And Krampus never came off to me like a demon. He never was like a demon. He was like a forest creature that, got a bad rap because of the way he looked, but he was there to teach kids a lesson, right? He was there he had to look scary, He was basically the bad cop, the yin to Santa's yang, and therefore, a force to be reckoned with. But, if you really dig deep into the legends of Krampus, you get an acquaintance there with a lot of the elves and a lot of the fairies and gnomes. I mean, there's a lot of, I guess you could call cross-pollination in the legend.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I like the idea of him being more like a bad cop. He has a role to play, and that's just a complimentary, in a way, to St. Nicholas. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's the idea of the balance, like you said, of punishment for children, or in hopes that they behave well enough that they don't get coal from him or a beating from him or whatnot.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of those elements come, like you said, it's a good mixture, and I think we see that just based on the way that populations converged over time.
Yeah.
Just, borrowing from other cultures until everything fits to what we see it as now.
Yeah, I mean, in my studies of Krampus, like I related a while ago, one of the things I think most people don't realize is that even creatures like werewolves are associated with Christmas because of the fact that the old Romanian tales say that if you conceive a child, or if a child is born on Christmas Eve, he is destined to become a werewolf or a vampire or some sort of we call it a revenant creature of hell, because you're not supposed to be breaking the rules of Christmas Eve or Christmas time. It's a sacred time, so having sexual relationships, conceiving children is something that's a bad thing to do. So you create some character like a werewolf or a Krampus or a demon, and of course that's where we get the idea for the Jersey Devil, is that I guess some woman had a baby that she wasn't supposed to have, and the Jersey Devil was created.
Yeah, the 13th child.
Yeah.
And she kind of cursed it. Yeah, things like that. And one of my favorite Christmas stories was like a Santa and the werewolf type situation from the 1800s. Yeah, where this family moved into a house that kind of had a reputation of not being able to keep servants working on the premises, and ultimately it ends with they hear howling at night, they hear scratching at the windows, and finally on Christmas Eve, when the father is trying to creep into the children's bedroom to play the role of Santa, he's kind of met with this werewolf creature in front of him.
I have never heard that story. I would love to get a copy of that story. I've never heard the story of this man coming in contact with a werewolf on Christmas, because I never really had joined the two together until I started reading stories, and it all goes back to when the snows fall, the winds are blowing, and the trees are clapping together at night. The sounds of, like what I played earlier, the sounds are heard like that, and immediately the imagination goes to some beast of the winter. That even goes back to the Norse tales of the what we call the winter armies, where when the snows would come, you could hear the roar of these creatures, and they were a lot like what you see in like Game of Thrones, or they were a lot like these snow creatures from hell. It was crazy.
Yeah, and you get the wild hunt all around the same time as well, where you hear it before you see it. You can hear these creatures coming, this epic battle or parade coming in, enough to instill fear prior to even seeing something that would be terrifying. And Krampus does the same thing. You hear him coming before he appears. You hear the bells or the chains, and you're alerted immediately that now it's time to get serious, time to be careful.
You were talking about how you can hear these things happening before they happen. It reminds me of the sons. What are they? The sons of Gryla. They were the Yule lads. 13 Yule lads, and what they are is they're like these 13. They say they're pranksters, but they're more like poltergeists. And they show up. I think this is another story, another ghost story of Christmas folklore, where, of course, Gryla is, I guess, the woman who gives birth, and then of course there's the Yule cat. That was another story too. Just all kinds of interesting, scary stories that we've abandoned that I'm sure are Halloween's revenge for the Christmas songs playing too early in the year. But the Yule lads, the Yule cat, Gryla,
Krampus. I mean, these are stories that I think there's a whole new market out there to write these stories and introduce them into the zeitgeist.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was doing research into Krampus a couple years back for Shannon LeGrow's Into the Fray Weird Writer blog, I interviewed someone who I really respect out of the Czech Republic. He's an artist he goes by the Raven of the North, and I asked him what their version was, if they had something similar to Krampus, because we usually think of Austria or Germany.
Right.
And he said that the way he was raised, their character is, and I'll probably mispronounce it, but Nikolaus.
Mm-hmm.
And he's dressed up similarly to how Santa Claus for us looks, a hat and a robe. He has a list of good and bad children, but what he's accompanied with are angels and devils.
Right.
And the angels will give sweets and fruits, the devils give coal and potatoes.
Right.
But again, you hear them coming too.
Right.
The devils that are with him have the bells. Yes.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of people don't realize that, they have garden gnomes in their gardens, but the truth is the gnomes were the watchers of the dead. They would stand over graves. They would even cannibalize on humans at times. And of course, those legends go all the way back to Icelandic folklore. And even today, you're looking at Icelandic folklore where they believe that the elves or even other creatures, trolls or what have you, still exist.
Yeah, the Holderfolk, you don't want to mess with them. They'll actually, from what I understand, move an entire planned road to not disturb them.
Right.
It's something that you have to respect them.
Yes, you don't mess with them. It's gosh, what an amazing discussion here. Heather Mosier with us tonight on Ground Zero. If you'd like to add to the conversation, maybe you've had experience with the Yule Lads, the Yule Cat, a werewolf, or even Krampus, we'd love to hear from you. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. That's why I'm kind of giggling, because whenever I'm scared, I giggle a bit. 503-225-0860. Back with more. Don't go away.
Where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind? Way out in the waters,
Christmas. But this Christmas was darker, less cheerful. But I still believed in Santa, in magic and miracles, and the hope that we could find joy again. But our village had given up on miracles and on each other. They had forgotten the spirit of Christmas, the sacrifice of giving. I knew St. Nicholas was not coming this year. Instead, it was a much darker, more ancient spirit. The shadow of St. Nicholas. It was Krampus. It's all right, Agnes. It's all right. Shh, pretty Agnes.
No, Billy, Billy.
I'm Clyde Lewis. You are listening to Ground Zero. Tonight we look at Krampus and the other strange dark creatures of Christmas. You know, we're talking with Heather Mosier, and during the break, I was so curious. We were talking about this werewolf story and the werewolf and Santa Claus, and it's just so synchronistic that, we're talking about these creatures because I just received, and I've been playing it all night, and I want to play it one more time, and we'll talk to Heather, but I received these recordings, and these are taken from St. Louis County, Minnesota, of some strange creature howling in the night. And I just figured, werewolf, Sasquatch, whatever it may be, still runs a chill up your spine as the winter cold is blowing outside and these creatures are lurking in the darkness. Heather Mosier's with us tonight on Ground Zero. Hey, like I said, during the break, I wanted to research and go after that story about Santa and the werewolf, and it looks like a person by the name of Heather Mosier wrote this story about Elliot O'Donnell, who was a prolific writer who investigated this situation. An amazing story. I'm gonna have to read that when I get home tonight. I'm skimming over it right now, but it's still. I mean, all the producers after you had mentioned the story about Santa and the werewolf, or the man who, I guess his name was Mr. Anderson, I guess, dressed up like Santa to try and, make the kids feel good, and he came in contact with a werewolf. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's quite a way to spend your Christmas Eve.
It's a good story to tell, too. And that's the thing, is that I think that, when you hear that lyric in that song, there'll be scary ghost stories and the glories long ago. Everybody says, what do you mean scary ghost stories? Christmas was full. If you drag out the Dickens, yeah, you got ghosts, but it was full of stories of fairy folk, gnomes, elves, Santa Claus, of course, like I say, the Yule Lads, which are like poltergeists, Gryla, what is it, Heck, her name's Heck, the witch, the troll hag. All these stories come from Norway and Iceland. And I just think that, like I said, there need to be more stories told about these creatures, because they certainly are part of the scary or the dark and foreboding nature of Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking into the actors themselves who play Krampus and the Krampus louse and stuff, there's been discussions of what we're kind of missing by not having those in American culture and not having this character be one of the central figures. And part of the thought is that one of the benefits of having a creature like Krampus, that it allows for the people that play Krampus to act out activities in an acceptable manner that are not normally allowed, such as like threatening, the attacks, which they're not, usually, as long as there's not alcohol involved,
right,
and things don't get carried away.
Right.
Scaring, intimidating, things that normally we may reserve for something like Halloween.
Right.
This is something that we get to act out in other areas at Christmas as well. And then kids also get a set of boundaries. They get to test the limits.
Right. Exactly.
And we're kind of missing that here.
I find it fascinating too. I remember, like I said, my first awareness of Krampus came from my grandmother and my aunt, who were both from Germany. And, they told us the story many times. And to us, it was just an old folk tale that was kind of scary, and it affected me. The only time I actually shared that story with anybody else is I was at a bar one night, and a friend of mine who was throwing a listener party asked me to speak about a Christmas story. And I didn't want to talk about Dickens, and I didn't want to talk about, Clement Moore or anything like that. So I thought, I'll just tell the Krampus story. And everybody in the room had never heard of Krampus before, and they didn't say a word. They were terrified of this idea of this creature. And I realized then and there that if Krampus were to come here, it would be
it'd be weird. But, now, of course, and a lot of Europeans are ticked off because we've turned Krampus not only into a demon, but into a cartoon character. And they don't see Krampus as being a demon. They see him as being, like I say, more of a fairy folk type of character. And it's funny because about 2-3 years ago, before the pandemic, there was actually a company that does spook alleys. They paid spook alleys for charity. And it was called the Fear Factory, or Fears, they called the Spook Alley. And so they'd shut it down for Thanksgiving, and then they'd revamp it for Christmas and call it Krampus House. And so people would go through the spook alleys at Christmas time, but instead of skeletons and all that, they had like evil gingerbread men and candy canes that had, that looked like spears, and then of course at the end you get to sit on Krampus's lap. So I mean, it's a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I first became introduced to Krampus when I came across this book by Chris Kolstrom called Drawn to the Dark. And she takes, I think it was 11 months to a year off of what she was doing, took her life savings and traveled the world to go to different places that had scare tourism. And one of the stops was in Austria. I had heard of Krampus, but I hadn't actually read it too much in depth until I came across her book, and it's fascinating. I have a friend who lives in Austria that once I read this book, I contacted her. I'm like, tell me about Krampus. And she said, you Americans find it so fun because you weren't raised in the terror that is
Krampus,
having people show up at your house.
Right.
And in her village, that's exactly what happened. At the time, she didn't realize that they were her cousins, but they were young men, teenagers, that would drink, dress up, show up with parents' permission at the house and scare the children until they were crying under their table.
I've seen the parades where the guys dress up as Krampus and they use brooms and sticks and twigs, and they're switching. They're using them as switches on kids in the parades. I'm thinking, boy, what a violent and terrifying life. Heather Mosier with us tonight on Ground Zero, talking about Krampus and all the other scary creatures of Christmas in the wintertime. We're going to get some phone calls coming up, too. So give us a call, 503-225-0860. That's 503-225-0860. Back with more Ground Zero. Don't go away. So, if the Grinch Who Stole Christmas is classic rock, then Krampus is heavy metal. He's punk rock. And, of course, holidays have always been strange times. Heather Mosier's with us to talk about those strange things that go bump in the night around Christmas time. We got some phones to get to as well, 503-225-0860. We go to Nancy in Kentucky. Hi, Nancy. You're on with Heather Mosier. Go ahead.
Hello, Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas.
With all this talk of Grinches and earlier about the sacrificial gingerbread men brought back memories of my graduate school time in New Orleans, where we used to actually burn Santa Claus. And you're thinking, what? Voodoo? No. No, it was more like V for Vendetta.
Okay.
People think of New Orleans as the Big Easy. It's more of a big city of service industry workers.
Right.
And service industry, we sacrifice our Christmas so that others can have one, deal with the public stress and such. And one day before Christmas, a bunch of us at our neighborhood coffee bar, grad students, musicians, artists, we're going to go see the magnificent Christmas bonfires that Cajuns have so that Papa Noel will find them in the bayou.
Right.
But we couldn't because of all this service work hours. And I don't know which one of us said, well, we should have a bonfire. I think I suggested, after there was this stuffed Dollar Tree Santa sitting on the bar, saying, well, we just burned Santa. And the next night we did. We didn't burn Santa Claus. We burned this Guy Fawkes symbol of commercialism.
Right.
And some of the musicians, they got their drums, and we marched him out like bonfire night with a proper send-off with Dead Claws walking, and we walked him out to the parking lot, and we set him on fire.
Oh my God!
And it was such a good release. And then, not long after that, you could hear the church bells for midnight mass, and it was like, we've released the evil Santa Claus commercialism.
You know what you need to do? I mean, this is how Burning Man got started. You realize this? I mean, Burning Man started the same way. You got to do this like there should be a tradition. Burning Christmas commercialism. And you find some Santa and you burn it in effigy every year.
Well, we did it for a couple of years after that. Even after Katrina, some of the National Guard guys helped us.
Wow.
And I don't know if I had to make the painful decision on graduation to follow work in another city. I hope it has continued on.
Oh, well, it just sounds like some sort of a weird tradition that would fit, Louisiana, I think, or New Orleans. It would just fit, the burning of the effigy of Santa, or maybe even the release of Krampus or the burning of Krampus. Heather, what do you think? That's a pretty interesting idea, don't you think?
I think that's great. It also allows for a communal aspect as well, the community coming together against something, and then also just the bonding experience in itself.
Right.
I think it's a good time of year for that.
It's a good idea for a party, I guess. Come by for the claws burning or burning claws. That's what you're going to call it. Hey, welcome to Burning Claws. I mean, that's what you do.
It was very much fellowship, and it's a time I miss.
Well,
but
Nancy,
Merry Christmas to you both.
Merry Christmas to you. What a great idea. What a great idea. I love that idea. Let's go down to Chris in New York. Hi, Chris. You're on Ground Zero with Heather Moser.
Hi,
go ahead.
Heather. When you hear of people losing their way in the woods, or, where they previously knew the trail, I wonder if that's induced upon them. That would be part one. And then people also see like these shadowy figures that might be people in the distance gathering as a group, but maybe are not.
Well, I mean, but I mean, you're thinking that back in the day, sure, there may be gatherings, but, at night, I mean, they were terrified at night. I mean, they hear the sounds of the night, and that's why they would open the windows and the doors to basically shoo away all the evil spirits, because that's what, I mean, back then, the darkness, I mean, think about this. We're not used to having it be so dark. I mean, we find ways to find light. They lit candles on their trees. That's how desperate they were for light. And so when you're there in the darkness and all you have is a fireplace or you have candlelight, there are a lot of shadows that show up. There are a lot of things that show up that you can't explain. And I think that's one of the reasons why, think about it. If we didn't have power, if we didn't have things and entertainments to keep us occupied, what would our minds be doing if we had to realize that at 4:00 every night the sun would go down and we'd have nothing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And that's something that I think we can pin back a lot of our stories and myths to what would it be like without these modern day accommodations and the knowledge that we have now. You had to come up with an excuse just to calm your mind and your thoughts of, okay, what are those sounds outside at night in the dark? What could it be? Mm-hmm. And then also, again, as warnings, since we don't know what it is or whatever our mind may run wild with, it's better to just stay at home at night. And it's easy. Even today, if you were to wander out in the woods, unless it's something that you have done time and time again, it would be pretty easy to get lost unless you had some sort of contraption to help you get through, whether that's GPS on your phone or a compass or something like that. Everything looks different at night, and depending on how the lights are in the sky, if the moon is full, it's a lot easier to see than if we're under a new moon. The dark of the moon makes it more difficult.
Well, Joseph Campbell had spoken, in his books about mythologies. He said that man goes into the woods for wisdom, and what he takes in, he brings back, and whatever is there, whether it be dark or light, he brings back with him. And I think it's because in many cases, and we've heard these cases before where, we've heard of people missing or whatever, that maybe in the woods there are portals and that we don't see them because the woods are very thick and they're dark and things come through in the woods. And that's that brings up a whole new can of worms. I mean, we've had arguments before at Bigfoot conferences as to whether or not Bigfoot is a creature that comes out of a portal and goes back in. But that's always been the legend of the woods, that things come in and out of the woods because they are open. They're a quiet and very out of the way place for things to come through.
Yes, and in different traditions, especially, I mean, we were talking earlier about the Nordic countries are where we get a lot of these Christmas, the darker Christmas stories. But in some of the Nordic traditions, when you get into different types of shamanism, when you're trying to really find yourself and center yourself, one of the best things that one can do is go outside at night and try to stay out there all night. Find a place, sit down, and just be. Listen to everything around you. But it's the darkness of the night, being isolated, that allows you to really go into yourself, and then who knows what other entities or elements may be out there to help influence you as well on your journey.
I want to introduce people to intothethrayradio.com/Santa-Ans-the-werewolf. Read that story. I'm going to go home and read it tonight. And, of course, Heather is the author of that story, talking about the man named O'Donnell who was investigating this werewolf story, Werewolf and Santa Claus and this family. It's an amazing story. And, Heather, what an amazing... having you on was just a treat for this holiday. Thank you so much for taking the time and being on the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's great job, and thank you so much again. And that, of course, is the Krampus show for everybody that have been clamoring for a Krampus show. This is probably one of the best we've had in a long time. And, of course, we're going to tomorrow have our celebrations of Christmas with family and friends. We're going to do it early. And then, of course, a Krampus party that we have at the end where we're going to be at a local bar called The Paradise. That's going to be around 7 o'clock when we get together. For those of you listening locally, we're going to be there. For those of you who want to fly out to Portland just for a Krampus party, you're invited as well. Stay tuned for On Beyond Zero on Aftermath.fm.